welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Speedy for those of you who are new here. I'm going a little bit blind because I have a light set up right next to me since it is very gloomy and it's raining today. I needed the extra light. We have finished July and are in August now, which means I can do my July wrap up. I quite literally had to stop myself from picking up another book because it was going to be a long wrap up if I did not stop. So be warned, this video might be a little bit long. In total, for the month of July, I read all of these books plus 2 more books that I had to return to the library. So a quick little rundown of my statistics. I read a total of 11 books. 2 of them were from the library, 10 of them were physical, 1 of them was on my Kindle. This month, I read the following genres: 5 romance books, 2 thriller books, 2 young adult fantasy books, 1 romance fantasy book, and 1 autobiography. I read a total of 4,513 pages, which equates to this big old stack right here. We're gonna go ahead and jump straight into the reviews because, like I said, I already have a feeling this is going to be quite a long video. So starting off with The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This was the first book I read for the month of July. So this story follows Jude, who at 7 years old watched her parents get murdered. That same person that murdered her family actually stole them away because it turns out that her eldest sister was part fae, part human. So this man took Jude and her sisters to fairy and then raised them as his own. The story picks up 10 years later where Jude is basically trying to prove herself, trying to prove that she belongs to fairy because that's all she knows, that's where she was raised. At the same time, she has people that doesn't like her because she's human, and one of them being Cardin, who is one of the prince of fairy. He's constantly picking on her. They absolutely hate each other's guts, and it is so angsty. It is just such a good story. This is a reread. I did listen to this in audiobook and really enjoyed it, but because I wanted to actually give it my full attention since I would listen to it while I was doing chores, so I finally got a physical copy and did a reread, and I still absolutely love how whimsical this world is. Like, it's a dark, whimsical world. The way I described it was if Bridge to Therabithia grew up and got a little twisted. That's what it feels like. I did find Jude annoying, but that kind of makes sense because of who her character is, her constantly trying to prove herself, and then her being a teenager having a very justified existential crisis since she is quite literally growing up in a world that is not hers. But overall, this was such a good story. It was such a good read. I enjoyed every second and it felt very different. I gave this a 4 out of 5. I'm very excited to continue the rest of the series. So the next book I read, I have returned to the library. It is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. So this is an autobiography slash memoir. Obviously follows the story of Jeanette McCurdy, her journey to stardom as a kid and what that entailed, and having to live with a mom who was a narcissist as well as had a bunch of other mental health issues and stuff like that. It did touch on topics such as eating disorders and body dysmorphia. It was a very hard read in the sense of the topics that sometimes it talked about, and I feel like halfway through the book got a little bit dark as well because it did talk on very strong subjects. I have been wanting to read this book for the longest, and when I saw it at the library, I'm just like,
I'm going to finally read this book.
I felt like I was reading fiction almost until I remembered this was the life of someone. Like, this actually happened to someone. It's not just fiction. This is probably one of the fastest autobiographies or memoirs that I have read, and I think what made it so easy to read was that the chapters were so short. They were 1 to 2 pages long, and so it just made it very easy to stop whenever you needed to stop. I feel kind of weird rating an autobiography. It doesn't really necessarily feel right, but for the sake of ratings, I am going to give it a 4 out of 5. Like I said, it was a very easy to read. I feel like it's a very important piece. So the book I read after that is Life's Too Short by Abby Jimenez. So this is the 3rd book in the Friendzone series.
Once again, I started reading her series out of order.
This story follows Vanessa, who's a travel vlogger who had quit her job after the death of her older sister because she realized life is too short and she wants to be happy and do what she wants. After she quit her job, she started a YouTube channel, and then at the same time with her YouTube channel, she was bringing awareness to ALS. To put ALS in the most simplest terms, it's basically a nervous system disease that affects the cells in the brain and spinal cord, which basically causes loss of muscle control. Unfortunately, many women in Vanessa's family have died of ALS, so she decides she doesn't really want to take life for granted because she doesn't know if she herself actually has ALS and wants to live life at her fullest while she still can. One day, her younger half-sister just kind of drops by out of nowhere and is just like, hey, take care of my baby, and the sister never comes back, so suddenly she has a newborn to take care of. One night, while she's trying to kind of put the baby to sleep, the baby's super fussy, and her neighbor comes and knocks at her door to kind of tell her off, only for the neighbor to feel kind of bad about it. So her neighbor Adrian ends up actually offering his assistance, and so then from there's a relationship that starts to develop, that starts into a friendship and then turns into a little bit more, and it just kind of follows the story back and forth between Adrian and Vanessa, and it's a really sweet, cute romance story. The thing about this book that I feel like felt a little bit short is that I feel like the ALS side of it all, or at least even the YouTube channel side of it all, could have been a little bit more fleshed out. I feel like the romance itself was pretty good, and it is a romance book, so I shouldn't really ask too much of it. I honestly would completely forget she was a YouTuber. I just feel like it needed to be a little bit more developed, but other than that, it was a pretty cute story. I really enjoyed it, so I actually did give this a 3.5 out of 5. So the book I read after that is Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan. So this was the book we're reading for the book club I'm in. So this story follows Allie, who is a mom of 3 and a professional organizer that is currently going through a divorce. Her mom died 2 years ago, and then a year after her mother's death, her husband asked for a divorce. The story picks up a year later. She's going through the motions of a divorce. She's still mourning her mother, and she's trying to raise 3 kids. Her life is just kind of a big mess right now. One day she goes and takes her dog to the dog park, and her dog happens to just pee on someone, and it turns out to be our main love interest. Ethan and Allie end up flirting for a bit. Allie feels like her old self again, talking to Ethan. It's been a while since she felt alive, basically, from the way it's described, and she's just really happy. The problem is that Ethan's only there for the summer, but there's obvious chemistry between them. So now Allie basically has to figure out if she can handle a summer fling, aka a summer romance, while still being a mom and navigating through her divorce. This is a perfect summer book. It is constantly reminding you that it is summertime between the camps, the paddleboarding, the dates, everything. It just screams summer. This is such a summer book. However, this might be a me thing, but I had a very hard time being able to connect with the characters. It might just be because they're older than me and I have not experienced anything of what they're experiencing, so it was just a little bit hard to relate, at least for me. But I have read books where someone is married or has kids and I'm still able to relate to the character to a certain extent. So just for me, I couldn't form that connection, which then in turn made me not really care too much for the characters. And then it made me feel a little bit detached from the book. I think the divorce was probably the most entertaining part of this story rather than the romance, and that's because the divorce basically follows Allie's self-growth journey and trying to rediscover who she is. I really just wanted to see Allie stand up for herself. But other than that, like, nothing was really too memorable for me when it came to this book. So I ended up rating this book a 3 out of 5. So the next book I read is Never Lie by Frida McFadden. This is another library book that I had to return, hence why I don't have the physical copy with me. Never Lie is about Trisha and Ethan, who are newlyweds and are house hunting. They go view a house during a snowstorm and actually end up getting snowed in, so then they decide to stay in the house. So once inside the house, Trisha feels a little bit uneasy. Something about the house does not feel right, and then later realize that this is the house of a psychiatrist that actually went missing. I'll be honest, Frida McFadden did fool me for this one. Like, I did not see that kind of twist coming for this one. I really thought I had it figured it out, but I was pleasantly surprised. However, as usual, the big reveal for who done it and all of that was very cheesy. I don't know, I've noticed that this is just McFadden's writing. She tends to be a little bit cheesy with the big reveal, but like, other than that, it was such an easy read. Like I said, she did fool me with the twist in this one, and I just thought it was very interesting. I really enjoyed myself. It was a very easy read. So I actually ended up rating Never Lie a 3.5 out of 5. Hi, so we're gonna pretend that I'm wearing the same clothes and the lighting is the same. My camera overheated and then quite literally died on me, and I just had to wait to charge it, so I'm just like, I'm just gonna finish recording tomorrow. So it's tomorrow. We left off on Reckless. This is the second book to the Powerless trilogy. I'm not gonna give too much of a synopsis for Reckless because then I will be spoiling what happens in Powerless, but basically Peyton is on the run and Kai is hunting her. This story focuses more on the relationship between Peyton and Kay and just developing chemistry, building up that angst. I mentioned before that Powerless was definitely a set up book. It almost felt like a prequel where you saw everything go into motion and it cemented the enemies to lovers. So it explored more of that in Reckless actually. I feel like the biggest critique I have for this book is that it focused a lot on the relationship, so it was more of a romance story rather than moving the plot along. It didn't move the plot too much, maybe towards the end. I appreciate Kit's point of views, and yeah, like I said, this book follows very much the complicated relationship between Peyton and Kai. And even though it didn't really advance the plot, I was still very much here for the angst, the pining for each other. The other critique I have is more due to the novella that came after Powerless, which is Powerful. Powerful focuses on Adina and Mac, and because it is so fresh in our minds, like the story itself was just right after Powerless, I would have thought that they would mention more of Adina in this book, or if Mac would come out in this book, which it did not. So that is something that I feel like they could have played with a little bit more. I'm pretty sure the novella kind of came as an afterthought rather than part of the plot, but I do feel like it would have felt a lot more gratifying if Adina and Mac were mentioned a little bit more. But yeah, I don't know. The novella kind of felt like a waste of time because it hasn't been tied in yet, but hopefully it'll be tied in on the third book. Overall, I'm still really into this series, and I'm going to give this a 4.5 out of 5. So keeping within the fantasy theme, I picked up A Court of Silver Flames. This is the fourth book in the ACOTAR series. I'm not counting the novella as a whole book by itself. A Court of Silver Flames is post everything that happened in A Court of Wings and Ruin. The main characters actually shift from Feyre and Rhysand to Nesta and Cassian. It's a whole shift of the story. It actually feels like a whole new story now because we have new main characters, sort of new villains, new problems, and new resolutions and stuff like that. This story is definitely a character arc book. This is purely on Nesta's traumas, Cassian's traumas, has major topics of SA, family trauma, and a bunch of other possible triggers. Due to everything that happened in the first 3 books, Nesta just kind of has like major PTSD and spirals through very destructive behaviors. So this book is just trying to help Nesta get out of that. Feyre trying to send help and Cassian being the main supporter of Nesta. I feel like one of the things that makes this book difficult to read is mainly the main character shift, because it's not like your typical reading a series about a small town about family members where each book is about one family member. It's harder because you've been following the series, you've been following the main characters for 3 books, and suddenly it shifts. This is why I still forever will argue that ACOTAR should have finished with the first 3 books and this should have just been a spin-off series, because it does feel like a completely different book. However, all of those negatives aside, this is still a really good book. The first part, you're kind of just getting used to Nesta being a narrator. Even though it's told in a third-person point of view, it's still seen through Nesta's eyes and then Cassian's eyes. So you still kind of get used to it in the first part. But then as the story progresses and continues, you kind of start rooting for Nesta and rooting for Cassian and rooting for them together. But also, like, I really enjoy the relationships that Nesta herself developed with people outside of the inner circle. I feel like that also is what made the story so separate from the rest of the series, but it just kind of showed how she really did just need to detach herself from her family so she can learn about herself and grow and just be able to deal with her trauma. Her main connection to the inner circle throughout the whole story is Cassian, because she's just so like removed from the inner circle at that point. I feel like once you get around part 2, part 3, and then especially like the last 100 pages, you are just obsessed with the story. I feel like this is one of the best character developments I've read. It just is mass written all over it. This is what Heir of Fire had, which is why it's one of my favorite books. It really reminds me of Heir of Fire. It reminds me of Manon. It reminds me of my favorite like female characters from the Mass universe. And so like Nesta really kind of made it up there, especially when Gwyn and Emery joined in as well. Love those characters, love their relationship. It's just so heartwarming. I really do feel like it's a very inspiring book, and like I said, those 100 pages, those like last 100 pages, there's always something about those bits that are just chaotic and like has you on edge. It is a good book. It's a slow start, and I know a lot of people DNF it because of it, and some people don't even want to read it because it's Nesta's story, but it is a good book. I would give it a chance if I were you. I really enjoyed this book, so this is going to be a 4.5 out of 5. And then as for spicy level, I do feel like this one is a lot more spicy than the rest of the series, so I'm going to give it, I can't remember the spice level I gave to the other ones, but I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5. Okay, so we're entering 24-hour reading challenge territory. I actually had read A Court of Silver Flames for part of my 24-hour reading challenge, which is why I ended up reading 11 books this month instead of 10. The next book I read is King of Wrath by Anna Huang. So this is another reread. I actually read this maybe a year, 2 years ago after the Twisted series, and then I had to give it a break because I realized that this is very similar to the Twisted series. So this book is an arranged marriage between Dante Russo, who's old money, and Vivian Lau, who is new money. Basically, Vivian's father blackmails Dante to marry his daughter by threatening Dante's brother's life because he has some very incriminating photos. What he didn't expect was to, you know, actually like Vivian. Instead of an enemies to lovers, this feels more like a grumpy sunshine billionaire romance. As a reread, this is exactly the kind of book I wanted. My baby's crying for attention. Hold on. He's gonna be sitting on my lap. I wanted the I'll do anything for you, touch or you die kind of romance. That's exactly what I got for Anna Huang. Anna Huang is also known as kind of like stepping your toes into maybe a little bit of a spicier, dark romance. Like I said, this isn't necessarily dark. It's more like the guy was really just very protective of the girl, and he has some like morally gray characteristics. However, there's no like I will literally kill someone for you, but he has that intention basically. My original rating when I first read it, because I read it right after the Twisted series, it was a 3 out of 5. It felt too repetitive, but now that I've taken a break and this is exactly what I wanted, I gave it a 4 out of 5. As for spicy, I'm going to say it's a 3.5 out of 5. The book I read after that was The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. This was not in my July TBR. I just needed a break from romance because the next 2 books I had at home were all romance books. This story is about Millie, who is on parole and is desperately looking for a job because she is currently jobless and houseless, and if her parole officer finds out, then she's going to be sent back to jail to finish her 5-year sentence. So she ends up interviewing to be a live-in housemaid in this beautiful house with a very eccentric family, and she ends up getting the job. What can I say about The Housemaid? I really enjoyed this book. I believe this is the book that really got Frida McFadden like exploding on TikTok. It might have been another one, but this one really feels like the one that everyone used to talk about. This was pleasantly a really good book. I really enjoyed myself. The plot twists were there. I feel like they could be a little bit predictable, but it was still very enjoyable the way everything was written out. Normally, like I mentioned earlier, I feel like McFadden has a very cheesy way of doing the big reveal. In this scenario, I feel like it worked out a little bit better. I feel like there wasn't anything that was absolutely completely memorable, but it was a page turner. I kept really wanting to read, really wanting to know what happened, and it was just, like I said, really easy to consume. So I'm going to rate The Housemaid a 4 out of 5. Still within the 24-hour reading challenge, this was the last book that I picked up. I did not finish it, but I did get halfway through it, and that's Powerless by Elsie Silver. I had just come back from a rodeo and I really wanted those country vibes, even though this one's about Jasper, who is the hot hockey player, it still did give a bit of those country vibes. Like I said, the story follows Jasper, the hockey player, and the best friend, basically adopted brother of the Ethan family, and Sloane, who is a cousin of the Ethan family. So this is a friends to lover story where Sloane, our main character, has been basically in love with Jasper ever since she saw him for the first time. The story starts off where Sloane is engaged to a completely total fool. Jasper kind of just picks up on this and realizes that Sloane deserves a lot better. Eventually, on the day of her wedding, right before she's about to walk down the aisle, she discovers some stuff about her fiance and decides she's being really dumb and does not want to go through with the wedding anymore, and asks Jasper to help her escape. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of friends to lovers because a lot of the times I'm just like,
Please just communicate.
friends to lovers usually leads to the miscommunication trope, and I do not like the miscommunication trope. Y'all are adults. I will say that the way this book did it was really good because it was kind of obvious that they did like each other. They just didn't understand why they weren't with each other. Sloane was more like, I've been rejected twice already. I don't want to go in for a third time. And Jasper was like, I rejected her, so I don't know if she's gonna want me. I felt like the romance between them was so cute. I really did enjoy the story. I thought it was really well done. Like I said, I'm not usually a fan of friends to lovers, but for this one, I feel like it was done really well. I just was gushy and happy and just like kicking my feet and just hee 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 all the time. So I really like this story. I'm going to rate it a 4 out of 5, and for spiciness I'm going to say a 3 out of 5. The books I've been reading this month, wow. And now last but not least, the last book I read this month was Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. This is Ali Hazelwood's latest book that she just released. There is a lot of mixed reviews out there about this book, and I am going to add into that mix. This story follows Rue, who is a biotech engineer that has a very difficult time in social settings and constantly comes off as short and cold. This is due to her upbringing and some traumas that she had to live through. She just doesn't understand emotions and doesn't understand how to process them well. So she ends up meeting this man on an app to hook up for the night. However, kind of life gets in the way and they end up not being able to get together, but Rue still kind of has like some feelings towards this guy. Fast forward to the next day, she sees Ellie, who turns out to be an investor that bought off the loan where she works in, and basically they end up on the opposite ends of the spectrum where they can't be together because technically their companies are just enemies. So one of the first things that's very controversial about this book is if you read a letter to the readers, and basically it's Ali Hazelwood saying that this is less of a rom-com, more of an erotic romance. Because of that, I was expecting it to be a lot more spice. I actually came in with the mind of it because I did read the note and I'm just like, oh, okay, so it's not going to be a rom-com. And it's not. It really isn't much of a rom-com. I was expecting the book to be a little bit spicier though, and I didn't really feel like it was necessarily like out there. I personally don't think it was too spicy compared to other books. I do still feel like it is one of her spicier works for sure. However, I will say, since it is still a romance book, the spice definitely overpowered the rest of the plot. I feel like it was concentrated a little bit too much on that. In a way, I didn't feel like you could connect with the romance too much. And so, at least for me, another thing that I wasn't a huge fan of is that this is very much like a insta-lovey, insta-lust kind of book. And I don't know. I just didn't really connect with the characters too much. I am going to rate this a little bit lower because I almost DNF'd this book. I was 100 pages in when I kind of almost just gave up. And then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pick up the audiobook, and the audiobook was a game changer. If there's a book to listen to on audiobook, it's this one because they did a really good job for sure. But if it wasn't for the audiobook, I probably would have DNF'd it. Like I said, I didn't really connect to the romance or to the characters that much, but I am going to give it a 3 out of 5, and for spice, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. And those were all the books I read this month. So like I said, a total of 11 books, 2 of them from the library, which is why I don't have on the stack, and 1 of them on Kindle. It was quite a month. I feel like because of the 24-hour challenge, I did end up reading a lot more books than expected, but I still had a lot of fun. I had to stop myself from reading more because as it is, this wrap up is going to be incredibly huge, but I also don't want to be burned out for next month. And that's it for July. I will be releasing my bookish vlog with my August TBR, but I think that's it. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoy my wrap-ups. Have a beautiful day, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye!